I come here, I meet with great groups in New Hampshire. I then get on a plane late at night when it's snowing and freezing out. Wonderful. And the pilots say, sir, it's going to be tough. And I get there early in the morning. I go to a Biden witch hunt. And then I come here in the afternoon and I stop and we make speeches and we get your votes and all that stuff. But nobody's ever had to do this before.
Well, you know, people didn't do it before because usually candidates who judges say are rapists don't usually get this far. But what we found in Iowa a couple nights ago was, well, Iowa Republicans that voted, those 14%, they like their presidential candidates that are called rapists by judges, and they like their presidential candidates that steal nuclear secrets.
And repeatedly defame women.
And they like their presidential candidates that repeatedly defame women. Now, you know, Willie, I'm new to this political thing.
Yes, let me help you through this.
You actually brushed me off yesterday when I fell off the turnip truck, and I thank you that right in front of an icy patch of snow outside of 30 Rock. He dusted me off.
That was nice of him.
I grabbed a turnip as we were leaving and going up into 30 Rock, and I was chewing on it, and he said, well, here's the deal.
Yeah.
And he explained politics to me.
That's good. You need to hear it.
Willie,
from the kids.
I still don't get it, though. Like, this guy's complaining because, you know, as the judge said, under any definition of rape, he raped a woman.
Right. And then decided to defame her again. He just didn't have to be in court today.
And so that's why he's going to court. Not
yesterday or today.
That's not a Biden witch hunt. That's Donald Trump's past finally catching up with him. But again, we can keep going over those Iowa results. But people in Iowa said, not only do they like their candidates that judges say raped women, they're more likely to vote for their candidates if judges say they raped women.
I wish we were joking.
And they stole nuclear secrets, and they gave away plans. Let people on their own campaign
it's actually not a joke.
Hear top secret plans on America's plans to invade Iran. That's Iowa Nice, baby. That's Iowa Nice is defined in 2024.
You're starting to get a handle on this politics thing, Joe. That was a good lecture we had in the elevator coming upstairs the other day. Yeah, you're right. I mean, when he complains about being put through all of this, remember, his whole pitch is that he's a martyr. This is all being imposed on him. He's happy to be indicted for his people, sort of making an allusion to the fact that he might be a religious figure in some way. More on that in just a moment. But there's an easy way to avoid having to shuttle between rallies and courtrooms, which is exactly what the judge reiterated yesterday. Do not commit rape. Do not take classified documents to your beach club and wave them around your office to anyone who will listen. Do not attempt a coup to overturn the United States government to change an election. Do not call the Secretary of State in Georgia and ask him to find a bunch of votes so that election can be flipped. This isn't happening to him. These are things he is alleged to have done. And that's why he's having to shuttle back and forth. By the way, as Mika said, voluntarily. He does not have to be in the courtroom in New York. He's going through this as part of his act of martyrdom.
Well, and it's a campaign stop for him. Actually, he does better in courtrooms than he does hobbling onto stages and saying really stupid things. It's the courtrooms.
He likes to feed into fake hate.
That actually fuels, we've seen, that actually fuels support because Republicans, again, in 2024, they like guys that break the law and rape women, according to judges in New York, and then, as you say, defame them. But did you hear how Willie just ticked down those 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, he knows stuff.
He does, and that's why I'm saying
there are
I appreciate him helping.
Two reasons why he doesn't have to be in court. I mean, number one, he doesn't have to be there. It's actually not required. But number two, after being found liable of defamation and sexual abuse, which the judge actually says was rape, he then goes on to defame the woman again. I mean, he just can't stop himself. And it's going to cost him a lot of money to do that.
He's still doing it.
Anyhow, along with Joe, Willie, and me, we have the host of Way Too Early, White House Bureau Chief at Politico, Jonathan Lemire, former White House Director of Communications for President Obama, Jen Palmieri. She's co-host of the MSNBC podcast, How to Win 2024 with Claire, and senior political columnist for Politico. Jonathan Martin is with us this morning. So while we're at it, Willie mentioned that he's sort of like making himself a religious figure. Did you?
Willie's making himself a religion?
No!
Join me up for that cult. I'm there.
I've already given money to it.
Many levels.
I am too, yeah.
But did you see the ad from the Lincoln Project?
Yes, and I've got to say, they just totally set themselves up for this. You know, Willie, it's kind of like if you got Nolan Ryan on the mound and there's a batter who keeps toying with Nolan Ryan. He keeps stepping out of the box right when Ryan's ready to deliver. Pedro Martinez did this too and everything. Does it about 3 or 4 times. And you can just get that look that you go, you're setting yourself up. Nolan's going to put one in your back. Well, I saw this Trump take on the old classic Paul Harvey thing. Guy, you know, made a man. Here, when Donald Trump did that, I looked at it and everybody's like, oh, this is so hard. Oh, it's the worst thing ever. And I just shook my head and I said, they're so stupid.
Yeah.
They really are so stupid. They're going to play for like 3% here, basically claiming he's the second coming of Jesus. And all they're doing is setting themselves up for a blistering parody of this. And sure enough, Nolan Ryan, he wound up really hard, put about 101 mile an hour fastball right in the Trump campaign's back.
And then to extend your metaphor, Joe, goes in the guy's back, and it's Robin Ventura. He charges the mound, and Nolan Ryan still puts him in a headlock and just continues to pummel him. A little deep on the reference. You can look that up. But let's watch
poor Robin Ventura. How would you like to be a good baseball player and still be known for having a 40-year-old Nolan Ryan pound you when you came out to the mound?
Yeah, Nolan put one on him that day. All right, so here's the ad.
Yeah.
This is from the Lincoln Project, a group many of you are familiar with, in response to a video shared by former President Trump, which declares, yes.
You know, Jen, it is, we just see the Trump campaign always playing small ball, always playing for their most extreme, setting up the whole, he is a godlike figure. He is the second coming of Jesus. And, you know, maybe that plays for the 13% of Republicans that voted in Iowa. But the rest of America's like, oh, come on, man. Just tell me the economy's going to be better and inflation's going down and the border's going to be taken care of over the next 4 years. And just stop all of this chaos and this godlike cult BS. But they can't do it. I mean, you know, if they campaign on the economy, if they campaign on basic stuff, they could actually be in a better position because polls don't matter right now. They just don't matter. But the more I say it time and again, Dan McLaughlin said it at the New Republic. There's a reason that when people talk about Biden, Republicans win. When people talk about Trump, Democrats win. And Trump can't help himself, and he sets himself up for that Nolan Ryan fastball right in the back.
I don't know about I didn't know about the Robin Ventura reference. Okay.
Oh, you got to see that.
It's like football's more my thing than baseball. Okay, so first of all, that I had not seen the Lincoln Project ad, and what's so good about it is not only does it debunk the Messiah ad, but it puts into context, which is so hard to do because Trump does and says crazy things all the time, and outrageous things, and things that are a threat to democracy all the time. But that thing does a great job of putting it all into context of how, historically, what the U.S. is dealing with, because we've never seen it before. We've never experienced it. We're like able to internalize it and treat it like it's normal and show what put that context into, put that threat into context. The thing that I'm wondering about with him going, I mean, come on, man. First of all, as you know, Iowa, not that big of a win. I'm not sure how in real terms, how many more votes he got in 24 than he got in 16 because so few people caucused. But to go from there, instead of your rally in New Hampshire, to your sexual assault trial in New York City, if things don't go well for him in New Hampshire, all of a sudden this whole campaign centerpiece of making the courthouse his communication strategy could look like a mistake. If he doesn't do great in New Hampshire, if Nikki Haley catches up to him, Jay Mark's got really interesting things to say about that, then all of a sudden that strategy could look weak. He doesn't handle losses well. That part of it could, that part could fall apart. Things could catch up to him even sooner.
So, Jonathan Martin, Joe cited an important number a little while ago, 14%. 14% of Republicans showed up in Iowa to caucus on Monday night. 14%.
Not a great turnout. Yeah.
And 51% of them voted for Donald Trump. And so there are about 700,000 Republicans in the state of Iowa. Just over 100,000 of them showed up. Yes, it was cold, but that doesn't account for that huge gap in turnout. So what do you read into that, number one? And number two, how does this spin now into New Hampshire?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that there's obviously less enthusiasm in a race that is widely seen as a foregone conclusion. The voters out there are pretty sophisticated, and if they're being barraged for months accurately with reporting that this is not a real race, then they're not going to show up, right? The other big thing, too, Willie, is I think a lot of the Republicans from 2016 aren't Republicans anymore, whether that's Iowa or anywhere else. And look no further than the biggest county in the state, Polk County around Des Moines, and look at the collapse in turnout from 2016 to Monday. That tells you a lot about the realignment of the party and the folks who have simply left the GOP. I think that combined, Willie, with the entrance poll, which showed that 30% of people believed that felonies would be disqualifying, was the most ominous news for Trump. Those suburbanites who are gone, number one, and then the folks who are still in the party, or at least are willing to participate, saying they're not going to vote for a felon on Election Day. That, to me, was the biggest takeaway from Iowa.
Hey, J. Mart, do you know what you call 14% of registered Republicans in Iowa? Do you know what you call that?
A caucus in a phone booth?
You call that a busy Friday night at the Red Bar in Grayton Beach. A little 38 reference right there. Okay. So
get in line, man. Get in line.
That is going
Take a number.
That's some. No, man, that's some 30A stuff right there that only J. Martin and I might understand. No, but it feels like it.
Yeah.
So, Jonathan Lemire, J. Martin and I need to take you to the Red Bar at some point.
Happy to go.
Burned down, they rebuilt it. It's maybe the best place in America in Grayton Beach. This God thing that Donald Trump is pushing, right? It plays for the cult, but you don't win in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia playing to the cult. And he's got Ben Carson out there, comparing him to the second coming of Jesus too. Like Alex, do we have that Ben Carson thing?
Oh my gosh.
Where it just
the biblical King David.
Compared him to King David, a man after God's own heart. Play it.
Well, you think about the Bible and King David. Most of those people probably, if they were alive back in those days, would have said, "Oh, what a horrible guy." The episode with Bathsheba and some of the other things that he did. And yet, he was a man after God's own heart. God uses different people for different times. You need somebody with a Manhattan business type of personality to deal with the administrative state. There are some real wolves in that Manhattan business environment, and to succeed in that, you don't just kind of be a flowery, nice person necessarily. No. That doesn't mean he can't be. I've seen him. When he's not being attacked, he's a wonderful person. Everybody, I think, would love him.
But just to be clear, you're comparing him to King David?
The volume is very low.
Okay, I'm sorry. You are, just to put up for the record, you're comparing him to King David, and that worked out well for King David, and that this is another King David, right?
I don't know about him, King. But certainly he has some policies that are very worthwhile. And the other thing, though, that must be mentioned, if the left is allowed to use the DOJ to hurt him and to eliminate him from the process, then that's when we lose democracy.
See, this is what this is.
Frame that.
This is a little bit of a shift. Little bit of a shift. He goes from Donald Trump is like King David, a man after God's own heart, to Neil Cavuto saying, okay, so you're comparing him to King David?
He has some good policies.
King David?
He has some good
Is that
policies.
what you do? And then he goes, well,
I can't really hear you.
know, his policies on quantitative easing are fascinating. He kind of went all the way from Old Testament man after God's heart to, I like some of his policies. You know, maybe that's the perfect interview.
USMCA.
And the clip that we showed before, exactly, Jonathan Lemire, to show that this Donald Trump is Jesus shit doesn't work.
Oh, Joe, come on.
Ben Carson remains a unique surrogate in the political world right now. I think we can say, yeah, I'm trying to be. I have to clean up what just happened there.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Carson, King David, look, he was really strong. He was really opposed to the weaponization of government. We know that. You know, so Carson's right about that. But to the larger point, one thing that we've sort of a truism about Trump that kind of gets lost every so often is as we focus on his base. That base stays with him. He absolutely has a very high floor for politicians. He also has a very low ceiling. There's only so far his support can go. He's not going to win over. These arguments right here are not going to win over those suburban voters of Milwaukee, of Atlanta, of Philadelphia. They're not going to be into him being compared to the almighty, I would guess. This is someone who is, facing a series of criminal trials, who will be in court later today as a defamation suit connected to a sexual assault case. This is someone who fueled an insurrection. This is someone who the Biden campaign is missing no opportunity. It took them a while to get there, but they're missing no opportunity to paint as extreme and as dangerous to the very fabric of.
You need to
All
clean
right.
up your act here, okay? The kids that are watching.
Okay,
this, okay?
thanks.
They're eating their cereal.
All right.
Making
22 past the hour. 22 past the hour.
Mom and
We're
dads are
on.
having to take them to go see Thomas and the Tank Engine.
Former
Do
President
kids still watch Thomas?
Thomas and the Tank Engine?
That Thomas. Do they still watch Thomas?
John says yes. John says yes.
Lemire's
Yeah, my kids have
John
aged out of
says
it
yes.
now, but they were, really into Thomas, the Thomas the Train. Yeah, the show, the toys. We still have a set around the house somewhere that my wife and I are trying to get rid of, but we still have it.
I like that. Well, Greg, buy it. Because I
actually hear a lot of parents saying, I want to watch Morning Joe, but I have to watch Thomas. And
Really?
Tank. Yeah.
Well, it used to be SpongeBob.
Yeah.
We used to go,
Great show.
That's
Former
so good.
President Trump is expected to be in a New York federal courtroom again this morning to attend the second day of the defamation damages trial involving writer E. Jean Carroll.
He's in court again.
Well, he likes to do it for his campaign. He doesn't have to be there, but it gives him that juice to drum up hate from his base.
You gotta go
to go in there and say, I'm a victim, I'm a victim.
Kind of like you lost another submarine.
I'm a victim of defaming a woman again.
Yeah.
Trump was in court yesterday for jury selection, but left before opening statements. He has already been found liable for defaming Carroll in 2019 while he was president for mocking her sexual assault claim against him, which he was found liable for. In this trial, jurors will be asked to figure out how much money Trump will have to pay in damages. Carroll's team is asking for at least $10 million. She is expected to testify today. Willie?
Joining us now, former litigator, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin, who's been covering this so very closely for us. So, Lisa, remind our viewers, as Mika just said, this is the penalty phase that the judge has already determined, right?
The judge has already determined liability.
Right.
And in the last trial, Trump was fined $5 million for both sexually assaulting E. Jean Carroll and for some statements he made about her after he was president in October of 2022. Think about this trial as sort of a messy defamation sandwich. If the last trial was the filling, this is the bread. This addresses statements that Trump made while he was president in June of 2019. In addition, E. Jean Carroll's lawyers are seeking punitive damages for Trump's continued statements about her after last May's verdict even including up to yesterday when Truth Social posted about her as many as 22 times in the lead up to the opening of yesterday's trial.
22 times in a day. In the hours leading up to his defamation trial, he continued to defame E. Jean Carroll.
Correct.
So yesterday there was some procedural stuff. Donald Trump's attorneys tried to get the trial delayed again. The judge says, no, that's not happening. Got into jury selection.
That's right.
So he was there for that, but then left. Is that right?
That's right. Jury selection took us all the way through a lunch break, and a delayed lunch break at around 2 p.m. When we came back from that break, Donald Trump was nowhere to be found, but he stayed for the entirety of jury selection. And the way that this particular judge, Willie Lou Kaplan, does his jury selection is by asking a series of questions to prospective jurors. And if their answer is yes, they need to stand up and in some cases explain. And former President Trump was very much engaged in that process, oftentimes turning around in his seat to look at the prospective jurors as they were answering. Some cases he nodded in assent. Other times he shook his head vigorously. There was a woman who was a prospective juror, for example, who had volunteered for the Biden campaign as a phone banker. You can imagine former President Trump was not enamored with her.
So he has said that he'll be back in court today, meaning he'll be listening to E. Jean Carroll as she testifies. Tell us what we should expect to hear from her. What is that going to look like today?
I think E. Jean Carroll can't testify, John, about the sexual assault. But what she can testify to is the person she was before, what her career looked like before the defamation, and what her life and her career now look like after, and particularly in the wake of his initial comments in 2019. You'll remember E. Jean Carroll published an excerpt from her memoir in which she accounted for that sexual assault in June of 2019. Within a day, or 5 hours after that first went up on New York Magazine's website, Donald Trump was on the attack. And it's those two specific statements that E. Jean Carroll will testify in the wake of the threats started coming, the contracts were cut. Her life changed in two meaningful ways, in terms of the threats to her physical security and in terms of her ability to earn a livelihood as a writer. E. Jean Carroll is a very distinguished writer who's written for everything from Esquire and Rolling Stone to Saturday Night Live, where she was nominated for an Emmy. This is a person who had a real career that ended in the wake of Donald Trump's defamation.
And Lisa, I assume is there a lot of precedents for, I mean, there's just no precedents, even like putting aside the fact that he is the former president, for this kind of trial, repeated defamation, and then for the person to be sitting there during jury selection.
Well, you know, most defendants...
And then also while she's testifying, so he's, you know, he is able to, you know, that's a intimidating presence, I would imagine, for jurors and for E. Jean Carroll.
That's absolutely true. Jen, let's start with the first question. I'm not aware of cases in which you've got the same plaintiff and the same defendant litigating successive defamation. Usually the first damage award is enough to stem the tide. But a civil defendant has every right to participate in their trial. They have every right to be present. What's the aggravating factor here is twofold. One, the threats that have emerged to E. Jean Carroll, and two, the dimension of what the defamation is about, sexual assault. I wrote late last night about E. Jean Carroll's posture during the trial because Donald Trump was sitting in back of her. The way this courtroom is set up, the plaintiffs and defendants don't sit next to each other, but rather the plaintiff's table goes first, the defendant's table is in back. And E. Jean Carroll, knowing Donald Trump was in the courtroom, sat ramrod straight in her seat, on the edge of her seat, almost pitched forward, as if to inch herself as many millimeters away from him as she could. If trauma had a seated position, that was it.
So how does the ongoing tweets or True Socials, how do they play into this? In other words, can't the prosecution say not only did he defame E. Jean Carroll, he continues to defame E. Jean Carroll. He did it 15 minutes ago before he walked into the courtroom. Is that a compelling argument against Donald Trump?
Well, it's a compelling argument for punitive damages, and it's actually a factor that the jurors are entitled to consider in punitive damages. How repentant is this person, or do they continue with their behavior? Now, there are some who have suggested that the right remedy here is to seek an injunction against Donald Trump continuing to put E. Jean Carroll's name in her mouth, as Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss's lawyers have done. That's not what I understand E. Jean Carroll's lawyers are going to do. Rather, what they're trying to do is find a punitive damages award that really feels like a punch in the stomach to former President Trump and makes him think twice about continuing this behavior. The question is, how much is it going to take to make him shut up? Yeah. That's essentially a rougher version of the question that her lawyer asked yesterday.
A lot, apparently, because he's already been punished for it, and he continues to do it day in, day out. I'm sure he's doing it as we sit here.
But the difference between $5 million and silence Willie, is probably a big gulf. And that's what Eugene Carroll's lawyers are trying to find out today and through the rest of the trial.
He'll be back there today, as you said. Former litigator, MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin. Lisa, thanks as always. Appreciate it. Mika?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And coming up, tensions are growing in the Middle East as the U.S. targets Iranian-backed Houthi militants in Yemen for the third time in a week, raising concerns about a broader regional war. We'll tell you what new actions the Biden administration plans on taking against the group. The United States has carried out another strike against the Houthis in Yemen. Yesterday's attack destroyed 4 missiles that the Pentagon says posed a threat to ships traveling through the Red Sea and nearby waters. This marks the 3rd attack since last week when the U.S. and its allies hit dozens of targets in Yemen. The White House then warned the militant group to stop attacking ships in the Red Sea or risk further action. But the Houthis have ignored that warning, continuing to fire missiles at ships, including a U.S.-owned vessel. Joining us now, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haass. Richard, at this point, what are the options for the administrations? Warnings are one thing. What's next?
There aren't a lot of good options, which is all too often the case. We can continue shooting at this or that missile site, and we have to hope that we destroy more missiles than they import from Iran. You can continue to try to interdict the missiles going there, which is what the SEALs were doing the other day. At that, they were successful, but tragically, 2 lost their lives. I think there's also the question of whether you can get the Chinese, interestingly enough, to help. This is going to slow down all sorts of shipping. It's going to raise the price of oil, potentially. China's a major importer of oil. So the question is whether there's something to be worked out diplomatically, because it's unlikely that this would be happening without Iran's approval. And groups like the Houthis have a degree of independence, but I don't think you can exaggerate it.
Yeah, Richard, what's the overall strategy? You have Iran working through the Houthis. You have Iran obviously launching attacks through third parties in Iran, in Syria, all across the region. What's the grand strategy here?
The answer is there isn't one.
What should it be? Let me ask you, what should it be? Okay, I saw that look on your face.
What it might be.
What it should be? Look, what we want to do is, to the extent possible, settle the rest of the Middle East so we can focus on Iran. It's Iran, both itself, its nuclear program, and obviously the half dozen or so militias that it backs, from Hamas to Hezbollah to the Houthis, what have you. What we want to do is isolate that. In order to do that, you need Israel and the Arab world working in concert. But as we've learned over the last 100+ days, you only have a chance of doing that if you deal with the Palestinian issue, among other things. So that ought to be our strategy. And we ought to be leaning much more to try to bring the war in Gaza to an end, not to allow the war to expand to Lebanon, to get a Palestinian political process underway. Then we can get the Saudis normalize with the Israelis, and we can try to build a regional coalition to isolate the Iranians and, if need be, take them on.
And what have we said all along? What a fool's errand to think that you can make Middle East peace while ignoring the Palestinian crisis. A couple of articles on the front page of the papers. The New York Times talks about the scope and quality of the Gaza tunnels awe Israelis. You've got up to 450 miles of tunnels underneath. Just an extraordinary network. The Wall Street Journal has a story about perils for Israel. The refugees are growing, and patience against Israel is growing. And Richard, as we have said here, I think most importantly, Joe Biden's patience, not with the Israelis, but with Benjamin Netanyahu, running out fast.
Well, it should run out fast. It should have run out already. He's getting, in some ways, played because Bibi Netanyahu wants to see this going. Because so long as the war is going, I would argue, he feels it makes it much more difficult for people to move against him politically. But I think the president has to lean on him more. There's really only three options, Joe. We can introduce resolutions in the Security Council isolating Israel to some extent. We can condition certain arms, which is what the Bernie Sanders and others want. What I think, again, he needs to do is go public. And he needs to be much more forceful, go over the head of this government, and talk to the Israeli people, talk to Israeli politicians. And guess what? You're beginning to see in Israel, finally, a post-October 7th politics begin to emerge. And people are saying, hey, to keep this war going forever isn't going to make sense. We're never going to eliminate Hamas 100%. Meanwhile, we're not getting the hostages home. And hey, what about introducing a political track? Who is going to occupy Gaza? We don't want to do it. How are we going to get Gaza rebuilt? We don't have the money to do that, and so forth. So you're beginning to see, for the first time, some politics emerging, and the United States ought to be a participant in that debate.
So, Richard, the president's going to meet with congressional leaders today at the White House with a big emphasis on national security supplemental spending. He needs more money for Ukraine, Israel as well. But Ukraine really appears to be funding appears to be in jeopardy because Republicans want to attach border spending security there. So what is the pitch, do you think, from the president about why support for Ukraine remains crucial?
Let's say two things. I'm not sure the Republican argument about the borders in good faith. The cynic in me thinks, maybe Joe disagrees with me, that the Republicans prefer to keep that issue alive, quite honestly, because it's such a powerful issue to bang the president over the head with. So one idea is maybe to split it. Out and to basically go public and try to build a coalition of if you will, real conservative Republicans who believe in America as playing a role in the world, and most Democrats, and couple the aid to Ukraine with aid to Taiwan, which Republicans will want, with aid to Israel. So I would think basically probably separating out the border issue, getting the three, but the reason to help Ukraine, it's the most basic issue in the world. We can't allow borders to be changed with impunity by the use of force. Vladimir Putin must be stopped. He can't be allowed to go on. Ukraine should not become subservient to Russia. And we don't want the Chinese and others to basically learn the lesson that if they just use force and hang in there long enough, the United States and the West will fold their cards. That lesson cannot be learned.
So
tiếp theo phần tai, chúng ta sẽ móc phần tai bằng len màu da. Đấy, đâm vào đây, lên 3 bình. Móc một đơn một nửa kép từ chân thứ hai. Phần mũi heo, người ta sử dụng lên màu da, lên 3 bính. Móc từ chân thứ 2 1 đơn, chân cuối 3 đơn chung chân. Xoay ngược lại móc 1 tăng. Theo mắt. Sau khi thực hiện xong thì mình đã có một webcam đầu heo mini như thế này. Nếu mà mọi người thích thì nhớ theo dõi video của mình. Bây giờ thì xin chào và hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở những video tiếp theo nhé.